Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining our next session of The Next Normal from Worth Live. I'm Juliet Scott-Croxford. I'm the CEO at Worth Media and your moderator for the next hour, and I'm delighted to be joined by special guests Liesel, Pritzker, Simmons, co-founder and principal of Blue Haven Initiative, Etoy, Ridgnal, Global Head of Strategy and Operations at the Will and Jada Smith Family Foundation, Marcus Glover, founder of M. Glover Capital, and Kathleen Entwistle, Managing Director at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey, Juliet.
Thank you all for joining. This series of The Next Normal is focused on how 2020 will turn us into better impact investors. Firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are keeping well during what has been a challenging few months and weeks. I know many of us have been impacted by the global health pandemic, as well as the devastating and violent racist incidents we've seen, and we're heartbroken and we're outraged at the events occurring across the country. The scenes and the conversations that we're having are uncomfortable, but I'm hopeful that using platforms like Worth and the power of this community to open up conversations will help break barriers and make this a positive and sustainable movement as opposed to a painful moment in time. And that's why I'm so excited to have our guests with us today. Forward thinking is the essence of this series of The Next Normal, and Worth is looking ahead to what the world looks like after this current crisis passes, and how specific sectors or businesses are not only responding to the existing challenges, but also what they're doing to think about innovation and to transform themselves and to pivot and prepare for the future. So this session is focused on impact, both from an investing standpoint, but more broadly, how we can all use our collective resources and energy to create a more positive impact on the world and drive for a more equal economy and society. And we really are delighted and so fortunate to have the speakers that we have today. So we have Liesel, Pritzker, Simmons, Etoy, Ridgnal, and Marcus Glover and Kathleen Entwistle with us to share their perspectives on impact and philanthropy. So before we kick off, a few housekeeping rules. This is a conversation, so we really do welcome questions from the audience. You can use your chat function at the bottom of this screen, type in a question directly to me, Juliet Scott-Croxford, or to everyone. I will weave it into the conversation if you'd prefer to stay anonymous, or I will open it out to you and you can ask the questions directly to the speakers. You are muted on entry, but we can unmute you if you do have a question. If for any reason you're not muted, please do make sure you are to avoid any tech issues. So let's kick off. It's been an unbelievably challenging and emotional past 3 months. In a nutshell, a global health pandemic, shelter in place for most of the world, historic levels of unemployment, multiple violent racist incidents, protests in pretty much every state and in many countries, reopening our states, cities and economies, a Supreme Court ruling for Article 7 against sex discrimination. Whoa. So first, just a personal check-in with everyone. Liesel, let's start with you. How are you doing personally? How have you been managing your own well-being during these unusual times, and how's it affected you?
Well, I mean, one of the things I knew, certainly knew before, but was made crystal clear at the start of the pandemic is, how I'm like the sort of the definition of white privilege. I live in a house that's got a yard. I've got all of, health resources. I'm as lucky as it gets in terms of, how I could shelter in place, and the fact that my husband and I were sort of still able to continue working. And that was made starkly clear at the beginning of the pandemic, let alone all of the things that have come to bear in light of George Floyd's death and all of, just the protests again that have come to light. And so I'm feeling really lucky and uncomfortable in that, because it's not, I just got born lucky, and I am, we've been doing a lot of just introspection as a company, as a family, around, why that's not okay. And there are a lot of more systemic structural ways besides our investing work, besides our philanthropy work, where we could really lean in. I'm fine. I'm perfectly fine, which is what makes me so unbelievably uncomfortable.
Thanks, Liesel. Etoy, over to you. I mean, we've had a number of conversations over the last few weeks. How are you doing today?
As I shared with you all, I am much better than I was, let's say, a month ago. This has been an incredibly challenging, at times overwhelming, and difficult time, for most of us in this country. Hopefully most of us in this country. Liz, I'm really happy to hear you say that. Just to know that discomfort is being shared, not just with us as people of African descent, but that the world is feeling the pain that is being so clearly shown to us right now. I like to say that, I think the pandemic and us being in quarantine really created a space for silence and stillness, a forced silence and stillness, and maybe even presence that had our hearts and our eyes and minds be a lot more open. And I think with, the rash of, incidences of abuse of power with George Floyd to, again, the situation, which to me was almost as devastating with Amy Cooper in Central Park, weaponizing her whiteness, as some would say, by threatening to call the police on a Black man for bird watching and asking her to follow the rules, right? And the possibility that could have ended in a deadly exchange to, Ahmaud Arbery being hunted and killed by, neighbors, more or less, right? It's been a really difficult time. And so for me personally, as a mother of a Black son and a Black daughter, it's been a lot of conversations and a lot of trying to really help them make sense of all of it, and really turning a lot of this pain and this anger and this anguish into action and into advocacy and into investment. And into moving towards a world where these things just don't happen.
Thank you, Etoy, for sharing that. Marcus, welcome.
Well, thank you, Juliet, and thank you to the community here who have all gathered around the campfire, so to speak. I especially want to give thanks to my fellow panelists. I affectionately called them super badass women last night, and that's my truth. I'm gonna stick to it. So I feel really privileged to share this this moment with you all. Juliet, we're friends, and so I feel like you know me as a relatively happy person. In this moment, I have to say I'm not okay. I'm happy that I can own that. But if the pandemic was challenging enough, I think to experience the re-traumatization of the aggressive policing that, as a Black man, it sadly is as American as you might say baseball and apple pie is. And, I'd actually like to, and I promise not to be long, but I'd like to do a short exercise just to see if we can open up here with like a moment of empathy, if you'd indulge me. I promise it won't be long. But what I'd love to do, it might be amazing for everyone at home to put your computer in gallery mode so that we can all see each other. And once you've done that, I'd like for you to put your hand in the air. Okay, and Juliet, you've been inside jail and prison with me, so you know the step to the line. So we can't do that, but I want to try to center us by using the experience of our hand. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to read a series of statements. And if you can affirm the statement, what I'd like for you to do is to put a finger down, okay? So I might say, put a finger down if the sky is blue where you are today, right? So you put a finger down, okay? So that's the rule, all right? So here we go. So I'd like for you to put a finger down if you have ever been called a racial slur. Next, I'd like for you to put a finger down if you have ever been detained or stopped by the police for no reason at all. Next, I'd like for you to put a finger down if you have fear that your children may have an awful run-in with the police. Next, I'd like you to put a finger down if your child in the last week or so, you've had to tell him or her, make sure your battery is charged on your phone and you know where the record button is. And lastly, I'd like for you to put a finger down if you have ever been held at gunpoint with your children by the police. And I just would love for you to look around. Thank you. You can put your hand down. And so I hope I didn't take up too much time, but I hope that one of the outcomes from today is perhaps through our storytelling, we can start to experience others' experiences and really maybe just try to see what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. Absolutely. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Marcus. And we'll come back to you in a second because I want you just to share about how you have been channeling your experience and your position around impact in a certain area. And I'm just going to welcome Kathy. Hello, Kathy. Welcome back.
Hey, Juliet. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's always such a pleasure to be here. And what an incredible group of people on this panel. I'm really honored and very happy to be here with all of you. For me, I would say very similar to Liesel, very happy to have somewhere to shelter in place and have a place for my children to come back home and be here for the last 13 weeks with us. The last few weeks have been, I mean, disturbing is an understatement. And it's, you know, introspective. I found that I'm really just thinking, you know, the pandemic has caused us all to go back to the basics, I think, which is not a terrible thing. The basics, the foundation of who we are as people and what our values are and where we want to be spending our time. And who do we want to surround ourselves with? And then I think these horrible deaths, these killings of innocent people for no apparent real reason, no reason. It's just unconscionable. I can't even say the word, but it's caused me to really think about it a lot. And it's caused me to take that time, that's really important, to step out of my shoes and into Marcus's shoes or Etoy's shoes or anyone's shoes who doesn't have the luxury of not worrying that their child will be targeted just because of the color of their skin. So yeah, I think it's time for a collective conversation. And there's lots of ways we can make impact. And as we talked about, it's how we invest our money, it's how we place a vote, it's what we buy at the store, and it's how we interact with others and how we open our hearts to where other people are and where we all need to go together, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, thank you, Kathy. And Marcus, you just took us through that exercise, which was so powerful. you've been a huge advocate for rethinking mass incarceration and reducing recidivism amongst males. Can you just share a little bit about your work in that area and sort of what took you to that place?
Well, sure. And again, thank you. So again, I'm Marcus Glover. I have been in private equity for the last decade. And my thesis has been simply this. There's a little known secret, it's a pretty dirty secret in the world, that some of the most hyper wealthy people are the people with the most scarce mindset. I'm gonna repeat that again. Some of the ultra high net worths of the world are folks who have the most scarce mindset. And so in terms of their investment strategy, they're not necessarily ruddering with a moral contemplation. There is this need for market rate returns at sort of a by any means necessary type method. And I think within this conversation around impact, there are those of us who just wake up in the morning with a feeling of abundance in our heart and a feeling of enoughness and saying, what can I do to improve the devastation that exists everywhere you turn in the world. And so it's just a question of, how did I get into this? I found my moral gut. I found things that I was unwilling to live side by side with. I'm here on the Upper West Side in Manhattan. I live a block away from Central Park, so I do feel an extreme privilege. But if I just went 3 miles to my east, I would run into this little devastating place called Rikers Island Prison, where I happened to have the fortune of teaching yoga and meditation for about 5 years. And what you think is that my life next to Central Park is in a city that is side by side with a place that can only be described as an institution of torture. Up until 1 year ago, there wasn't an anti-shackling law in the state of New York. And I'm sad to tell you this, but what that means is that up until the year of 2019, it was legal in New York State to shackle women's ankles during childbirth. And I'll just allow that to sink in. This is 2020. And so what I have to say is that it becomes very easy to decide, sort of language like impact investing. I don't even really know what that means, but I just know that I have a moral gut and I have a sense of what I'm unwilling to compromise on and I'm unwilling to sit side by side with. And for me, ending mass incarceration, divesting from prisons, jails, and detention centers, and reinvesting in community, it's a pretty easy consideration to come to. So.
Thank you. And Liesel, you've been an impact investor for many years, and through Blue Haven Family Office, you've been a real advocate for it, and also sort of been very vocal about the sort of linking your family values to the impact that you're having on the world. Tell us about your approach and how you got started, and a bit about how you sort of structured your portfolio today.
Oh, she's muted. She needs Molly to unmute her.
There we go. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I am an impact investor, practically speaking, because I inherited a whole ton of money, and was trying to figure out what that meant, and what to do with that. So very operationally, that's what puts me in this position. I try never to forget that complete luck of the draw. That being said, Marcus, a lot of what you were saying really, really resonates with me around, I think what you do with your money is a moral decision. it's a moral decision across the board. You don't only get to say, I want to talk about the impact of my philanthropy. That's where I have positive impact. I don't want to talk about how I make my money, but I just want to talk about this piece because that's what I've aligned with my values. You don't, even if that's what you want to do, that isn't what's actually happening in the world. All of these decisions that we make, how we invest, how we spend our money, how we make it back, they have consequences, and those consequences are moral, and they're part of a structure and a system that we participate in. And so why I'm an impact investor essentially stems from that. I don't understand how I could engage in the world and not take responsibility for what my assets are doing and who they're affecting and how they're affecting it, how they're affecting those communities. So it kind of, I don't understand any other way. So essentially what we started doing was building our portfolio out with that in mind, of what different sorts of investment vehicles, what are they actually doing, and how do I find ones that are having an effect that I would be proud to tell my kids about, or I would be proud to say that's how we can pay for things, is because we invested in that business, or we invested in that community, or this energy efficiency fund, and the thing is there's things can have positive impacts and also negative ones. And so, it's not like everything in the energy efficiency space is perfect. There's real people that are doing this, and we can't always get a handle on anything. But to me, being an impact investor means, first of all, understanding that where you put your money has a moral consequence. And secondly, taking responsibility for the good and the bad of where you choose to put your money. And once you start to view it that way, you can't unsee it. you can't go back, because why would you? And so that's how we've sort of built out our portfolio, and particularly over the years, really trying to match appropriate returns. So I don't think that, different interventions or different sorts of investments should and can get different sorts of returns. I'm not sure it's fair to say I want a VC return on an early childhood intervention in a community that cannot support that or pay for it. It's ridiculous. It shouldn't be. And so there's a whole lot of things that I think markets can be effective at scaling, a whole lot of solutions, and a whole lot of things that they just shouldn't touch. And so that's where our kind of philanthropy, and even more importantly now, our sort of policy and electoral work, I think, comes into play, because investments can be powerful tools. They can be great at scaling very particular things, and then they should just sit out of some of this other stuff. So that's what we've tried to do as a family office, and thinking across our different sorts of resources and buckets that we have, and being appropriate when we use them.
And Etoy, how, because I know quite a lot about the work that you've been doing with Will and Jada Smith and the Family Foundation. What approach have you been taking, and how have you been linking their values to the impact that you're seeing or trying to see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. I want to just first say I wholeheartedly agree with Liesel and Marcus in terms of approaches we have to take as individual investors. And for myself personally, in my own individual portfolio, I'm always looking at businesses or ideas that are going to serve humanity and deepen our, whether it's wellness, approach to food, et cetera. So I strongly agree with you in terms of your perspective as an individual. The Will and Jada Smith Family Foundation, which actually has been in existence since 1996, honestly really is built around the family's passion points. Our motto is social impact in everything. And that means that the family, each individual family member very much believe in there being a social impact element in everything they do, whether it's a film project, music, fashion, whatever it may be. Social impact and being able to improve the lives of others in some way is extremely important. And so, our four pillars are arts and education, social empowerment, health and wellness, and sustainability. And just to give, a couple of really great examples, Jaden is probably our really amazing impact investor in the family. He's launched a variety of initiatives, which I'm sure you guys are familiar about, such as Just Water, which was birthed when he was 12 years old. And it was born out of him seeing water, seeing the ocean filled with plastic, and realizing the way in which that affects ecosystems and humans, and wanting to do something about it. So he launched a box water company in a community, Glen Falls, New York, that was actually suffering from a loss of mass unemployment, jobs, and so his focus in that endeavor was to bring jobs to the community, produce a boxed water product that would reduce the use of plastics, but also be offered at an affordable price point for the consumer. And so for him, impact at every single point, the worker, the product, the consumer, was very important in terms of how he went about developing that business. And recently he just launched an initiative called 501c3, which is offering clean water solutions, climate solutions to the world. He gave birth to a climate innovation lab that essentially came up with a water filtration system, a mobile water filtration system. We now have 4 water boxes in Flint, Michigan, which, if everyone remembers, is still without clean water after many years, and looking to now expand that reach into Oakland and Newark, which are the next Flints for the United States. They're very, very close to being at Flint levels in terms of unsafe drinking water, and then expanding to Uganda with our first water box going out this year. So, for us from a philanthropic standpoint, it's important to assess every opportunity that comes our way and think about the impact it's going to have on multiple verticals, not just thinking about the business aspect of it, but what's the people impact it's going to have, what's the planet impact it's going to have, and just being more holistic in thinking about our approach.
And you've all sort of thinking about the moment in time that we are now in, which we had a long conversation about last night about actually, we really hope this isn't a moment, but a movement. But you've all been very active in your own areas during this pandemic and during this time of really trying to support racial justice. Can you just share a bit about that? Marcus, you on behalf of Defy has been working with ACLU on a lawsuit which came out this week. Liesel, you posted a thread on Twitter recently about how you've responded to COVID. Etoy, you've got some great stuff in the works. Who wants to go first? Marcus?
Sure. Well, so just to unpack it a little bit for the folks who are gathered around. So criminal justice reform is massive. And I should say mass incarceration is a massive topic You know, it's a matrix all unto itself. And presently there are 2.5 people detained in prison jails and detention centers in the United States. Around 95% of that 2.5 will release out. So they'll serve out their sentences, they'll parole out. So each year, that's a, you know, sort of a new introduction back into society of returning citizens. We spend as a country about $80 million a year for prisons, jails, detention centers, probation, the whole system. So as investors, I'd like to ask us to put our valuation caps on and think about like a company with an $80 billion valuation. Amazon is well north of that, Apple is well north of that. But let's just pretend for a second it was Amazon. And so for an $80 billion market cap, imagine that 70% of the products that you bought on Amazon were returned. Okay, so I ask any investor on this panel, would that be a place that you'd want to put your money? Right? Okay. Universally, we'd all say, hell no, right? Well, the reality is we dump a fresh $80 billion check into the system every year. And so many people say, yeah, the system is broken. Others say, actually, it's designed to do exactly what it's doing. So that 70% number is represented by the amount of people that recidivate or end up back in jail.
Right.
Now, there's two reasons that they primarily end up back in jail. One is lack of stable housing. Right. Second is lack of stable employment. And I hope that that syncs with you, because that just feels super defeatist to me, that we couldn't get a roof over someone's head right. and a basic job to help them to move forward in life. And so, as Juliet was saying, I chair the board of an organization called Defy Ventures, which helps returning citizens to find a different trajectory in life. Now, the saddest part about it is, as a country, we don't just have a criminal justice system. We seem to have a recriminalization system, right? Because it's not just enough that you pay your debt to society. We recriminalize them by, so in most recently, the PPP loans, which if there are business owners assembled today, maybe it was a lifeline for you and your business. I happen to know a few people who have lived to see another day in business because they got access to PPP loans. Well, the reality is that question number 6 is, do you have a prior felony conviction? And if you check the box, yes, you're immediately dismissed from access to the PPP. Remember, this is our tax-paying dollars that we're using to discriminate against people with criminal histories. So long story short, this past Monday, the ACLU filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration and the Small Business Administration for discriminatory practices against people, business owners, who have had felony convictions. And Defy Ventures is the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit.
Very
so
good. That's great. That is great.
Amazing. And Defy, we'll share a bit about Defy when we follow up after this. But it's an incredible initiative, and I've had the fortune to be part of it, and it really is eye-opening. And it's not until you sort of go through that process and go inside and you're educated in this that you don't realize how much of a systemic and sort of backward issue it is. Liesel, talk to us about your sort of COVID-19 response and what you did at Blue Haven.
Sure. So, I mean, we have been, I mean, and it's interesting, I sort of am now blending the sort of COVID, racial justice, like it's all sort of, I don't know, it all kind of, I think in many ways moves in tandem. Essentially what we've done is we've doubled our sort of giving this year, and it's split between philanthropic work, some of it directly related to COVID. So we've really liked and leaned into Give Directly. I kept seeing all of these sort of funds coming out, like these sort of impact investing COVID funds. And I was like, maybe we just give the people the money. Like the event driven, sort of one-time cash crunches are when unconditional cash transfers really actually can be incredibly powerful. I think so Give Directly does unconditional cash transfers. Essentially, they usually do it in emerging markets, but they partnered with a fintech here in the U.S. to target payments to families in need. So they kind of go by areas with high concentrations of SNAP recipients, and just transfer money. And the data is extremely strong around the positive impact of these cash transfers in times exactly like this. And so we were like, great, let's just, they already do this and they do it very well. Let's just do that. And so on the COVID side, a lot of it went to that. There were a few other investments that we made. And then on the racial justice piece, there are a lot of funders who've been thinking very thoughtfully around this, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's voter suppression, whether it's sort of representation as well, getting more people of color in positions of power. And so actually most of our extra giving on the philanthropic side is electoral and C4, because I think that's really, we need more progressive policymakers who actually have lived experiences to be making those rules. So Marcus, one of the things that made me think of when you were talking is looking at the marijuana legalization bill in Illinois, for example. That's been something that has been on the agenda for a while, but there was a really, really important part of that legislation that wasn't in there when it was led by 2 white state senators, but it came in when they added African-American voices, which is around expunging the records of people who had been convicted. And that's because, for exactly that reason, Marcus, that you just said, because you can't get a job, you can't get a loan, all of those things. So expunging the records of people who had been incarcerated for silly reasons, essentially, now are able to do that. But that's not a pain point that those 2 white women really had experienced. They came from communities where they might not have known somebody who was really truly affected by that. And so it really matters who is whose voices are being heard, no matter how sort of progressive the white voice might seem. It really does make a big difference. So most of our work over there, in terms of our sort of the racial justice piece, has been around the electoral work, and both at the local level, state level, and then of course there's somebody that that getting him out of office would be super, super helpful, just like across the board for everybody's mental health. But we won't go there. But another piece of this also that I see related both to COVID and the racial justice piece, that we have been huge proponents of, is a wealth tax. Honestly, you want structural reform, why should I would rather sort of participate in a very, very small amount of redistribution that reinvests back into my own country, and not just in ways that I think are appropriate, but in ways that democratically elected leaders can allocate.
And Liesel, you've been quite vocal about that, and signed a pledge. I think it was last year, wasn't it, about the wealth tax and redistribution of wealth?
Yeah, I think it's. I think it would, for a whole host of different reasons. I mean, you could fund early childhood development for the whole country for everybody every year. and like, I mean, come on, this is a no-brainer. And, you know, you can still go buy a yacht. If you're in the club that it would be affected by a wealth tax, you'll be fine. And I think it would just help. And so I think, yeah, we feel really strongly about that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of tax reform. But anyway, my point is that there are some great things that our investments and our philanthropy can do, but it is not it's not a replacement for engaging civically with these issues as well.
Yeah. I want to, there's a few questions that have come in. Etoy, I just want to touch on the work that you're doing with racial justice and the Together Band and the campaign that you're going to be launching next week. If you could just share a bit about that.
Yeah, so we have been engaged in quite a few COVID relief efforts prior to actually throughout the whole duration, from, you know, Jaden's I Love You restaurant, which provides vegan meals in food deserts. We've been providing monthly vegan meals, shoes, clothes, PPE equipment here in Skid Row in Los Angeles. In addition to Jaden's 501c3 initiative has been working with the Governor Newsom's team to create a disaster response initiative to call together volunteers during times of epidemics and times of great need, as in we have quite a few here in California, from fires to the recent coronavirus epidemic. In terms of expanding that work, we have a couple of key partnerships coming up. One is with the Together Fund, which is an initiative of the Together Band campaign, which seeks to raise awareness around the UN global goals, the 17 global goals. And so we will be launching a global fund that will focus on racial justice organizations and providing support to racial justice organizations that are in alignment with UN Global Goal 10, which is reduced inequalities, and Global Goal 16, which is peace, social justice, and strong institutions, in addition to providing support to COVID-19 relief work at the World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, and other organizations. So that's a campaign that's going to be launching in the next week or so, which we're really excited about it. In addition to, we're doing a campaign with Lyft, where we're going to be essentially offering free rides to job training, the first 3 weeks of employment and internships in the communities that have been highest hit for unemployment amongst African Americans, in addition to grocery access, so access to grocery stores as well. And again, the idea is, you know, the COVID epidemic has disproportionately affected all small businesses, quite honestly, but it's estimated that about 40% of African American small businesses will be wiped out as a result of the pandemic. And given the other issues that we're battling as a community, those are businesses that may not come back, you know, jobs that may not come back. And so we just want to do all that we can to make sure that we're being responsive and supportive, you know, in alignment with the work that the Smiths have been doing for the last 20 years at the community level, but we want to be responsive and supportive on both the COVID and the racial justice front.
No, I want to, I'm going to open it out to questions, but I do want to come back to sort of where we go from here and the future. And we had quite a profound conversation last night about what impact means, and actually resources, how you use your resources and your energy. It's beyond financial resources, and, you know, people have a voice. And so I'm going to go to Lydia. I think, is Lydia there? You had a question regarding. Yeah. Thanks, Lydia. Hi.
So years ago, like 2007, I was a private banker with UBS, and I was hired specifically with a non-finance background in the beginning. I had to take all my exams and everything because I knew about social impact. And they hired me because their wealthiest clients didn't want to do philanthropy anymore, and they wanted to be in the game. They wanted to be invested actively. And they really didn't care about return. So we would structure these ridiculous, like in 135 years, you will. And that made them very happy. I think the whole field undercuts itself by getting caught up in all this finance language. And people really do want to do well. They really want to invest in something they can trust. The only thing holding them back, and I'm sorry I'm ranting. So what any of you, what do you think we can do to get better stories out there?
Lydia, this is Kathy. I would say thanks for your comments and questions. I was recently at UBS, and I just recently transitioned to Morgan Stanley. And, you know, these firms have incredible, you know, thoughts now on impact investing and listening to clients. And I would say, as, you know, as a private wealth advisor, it's not about money. It's not about, you know, dollars and cents. It's about understanding each person's individual story and being able to really understand their priorities when it comes to their values and their goals and what's most important to them, and then helping them align their resources to reflect that. So I think that is really powerful. And I do say, you know, money is power. You know, we have the power to make change. We have the power to make impact. We have the power to make decisions that will put us and others around us in a better place. So don't be afraid of money. Use it for good. And I think that is really maybe what you were referring to. I'd love to hear from the other panelists too, but that's how I look at it. And that's what we try to do and help accomplish the people that we work with.
Marcus?
Well, yeah, sure, I'll go. And thank you, Lydia, for your question. You know, for me, it's about pointing to our North Star and being clear about what the North Star is. I live on the Upper West Side. Over the past 2 weeks, I go on my morning walk and I find myself down on 57th Street, 5th Avenue. And I don't know if anybody has seen the pictures of the Four Seasons Hotel boarded up, and all of, you know, Gucci, Fendi, all of them with plywood in front of those windows. And what it speaks to me about is, you know, every sort of cycle, 5-10 years, we find ourselves in these moments of tremendous economic dislocation and loss. And the reason is because we refuse to address some of these systemic issues. You know, there's a robust movement in America right now around diversity and inclusion. Representation truly does matter. But I often think I don't necessarily want to see more faces. I want to look at the stool, and I want to begin to like knock legs of the stool out. I want to be able to say that in the time that we have here on left on Earth, that we're going to make some changes, you know, in terms of like racial justice, social and racial inclusion. I don't want to kick this can down to the next generation. I don't want my grandchildren on these Zoom calls, you know, grappling with how to solve the very same things that we are here seem to be not remembering 50 years ago were brought up, right? So Albert Einstein was the one who said to do the same thing repeatedly and expect a different outcome is the definition of insanity. And so I think in your question, you mentioned the word, how do we get better stories out? I think that is the answer. I think we've got to point to a North Star and say, look, this is where I'm going. Are you along for the ride? You know, to your point, there is a blended capital stack. Sometimes it's philanthropy, sometimes it's private equity. You know, these are all weapons to be deployed against a problem. I think they all play a role, but I think it's like, can we agree that this is the problem that we have to solve?
Well said.
And just to,
go on.
well, just to add on to that, also, I think that one of the things I hear a frustration in your question is we've created this sort of very narrow framework of sort of what is an effective, efficient way to do things, right? And so, like, you know, let's have hospitals run by private equity. They will make them more efficient. Okay, over the life of the fund, but if you actually look at all the damage that's going to be, look at how expensive it's going to be to clean up that mess going forward. So it is not more efficient. You're just, you're putting the cost on somebody else's balance sheet. So that's that's the part that I find like sort of bizarre, is that we've created narrower and narrower and narrower ideas about sort of, yeah, what's the right way to do things. And where I think things get tricky is that, you know, who is trained or is comfortable or is allowed to sort of sit in a longer time horizon than everybody else in their universe or peer group, or sort of think in that way. These are different, and are you going to get judged, and are your peers going to think you're not good at what you do? And so, like, I feel like we need much more expansive frameworks and the ability to sort of build them. This is one area where I try really hard to push family offices on, because they have no excuse not to be able to think creatively. They're not a fund. They may not have other, you know, if you're a single family office, like, it's just sort of cowardice if you can't get beyond it. You don't have to think narrowly. And so, you know, the board isn't going to fire you if you want to do something a little bit more creative. And so that's where I'm trying to lean into in that space, because maybe they could, you know, there's at least structurally, they're not encumbered by something that wouldn't allow them to do it. But I think that's part of the issue, is that we're not thinking long-term enough and taking responsibility for it.
I want to go to another question. Rob, hi Rob, you had a question about sort of geography and location, which I thought was interesting.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Juliet and Kathleen. Thanks again. It's Rod Colorina here. Among hats, I'm on the XCOM of minorities and restructurings and alternative investments. Liesel, I've met you and Lauren before at Blue Haven. My question to you, and then Etoy and Marcus, with regard to geographies, with sort of the U.S. In the last 6 months with COVID and some of the other things we've mentioned, are you shifting your brain power more towards U.S. versus other spots overseas, Liesel? And then Etoy and Marcus, how are you getting your message from frankly beyond just urban centers into the suburbs and rural areas, which are fairly important in both policy and commerce? Thank you.
Thanks. Liesel, do you want to go?
Sure. So, I mean, so we have had our venture capital portfolio that we invest in-house is focused and has been for the last 7 years on financial services firms and actually sort of logistics businesses in sub-Saharan Africa. And so we've continued to do those investments through COVID. We actually just recently made an investment into a company that does essentially logistics for ambulances in Nairobi, which has been really interesting in this particular time. But so we're continuing to see opportunities in emerging markets. If I'd been really smart, I would focus a single country fund on Vietnam right now. They're the only, I mean, my God, talk about getting it right. Anyway, but we're sort of continuing with our existing geographical allocation, but certainly sort of philanthropically and as I mentioned on the C4 and electoral side, that's all doubled down in the US. Because also those decisions, and for better or for worse, really do affect how policies and money flows to the rest of the world as well. So I think if we can get our democracy right, the ripple effects are pretty big.
And Etoy, do you want to comment on the geography question and how are you getting the message out there outside of the urban areas?
Yes, so our message is always global. We don't just focus on urban areas. Campaign with Lift is very urban specific, largely because we have a goal of helping communities that have been overwhelmingly impacted by COVID, but also communities have been affected by the recent uprisings in terms of a lot of stores have closed. And so, communities that were already under-resourced are even more under-resourced now, just given everything that's righteously, been occurring, the anger that's been occurring over the last month. So for us, our work is global. We, have quite a bit obviously happening in the United States, and most of our grantees from a philanthropic perspective are US based, but we have been really expanding and deepening relationships in the UK, in India, and also in Africa, with our water box in Uganda being a first initial, foray onto the continent. But I think I wanted to kind of go back to the question of where do we go from here? And from a philanthropic standpoint, I think Liesel hit on a really great point about how important it is to, at this moment, give unrestricted funds to the nonprofits that you may be investing in. I think one of the things that we're seeing as you look at the different organizations who've been receiving very large sums of money from, the Black Lives Matter protests and movements, is because the funds are given for a specific purpose, they can't use it across the board. So they may have $20 million that's just sitting there because they've, exhausted the use. Let's say it's a bail fund. They've bailed out as many people as they can. Now they have $20 million just sitting there that they can't do anything with. And so, I would strongly encourage you to consider, giving unrestricted funds, honestly, for the rest of this year, because, COVID is going to be with us for a while. We don't have a vaccine coming soon. And so there's a very good chance that, at least for the next year, nonprofits especially are going to be struggling to recover from this. And so, become a monthly giver, right, to your favorite local nonprofit. Do the work, research, vet, figure out, what areas you want to serve, support organizations that you personally feel connected to and confident about in terms of their ability to deliver, and then invest in those organizations for the long haul, because that, there's a whole conversation we can have about our social services infrastructure in this country. and why it is that, you know, folks are overly dependent on charitable organizations. Just to give you one small example, we partner with an organization called the Midnight Mission here in Los Angeles. And when the stay-at-home orders first hit, they became literally almost one of the only sources for food and resources in that entire area, right? And because all of, you know, the philanthropy dried up, you know, people stopped going down to donate, you know, the churches and many of the other organizations couldn't sustain the support. So they saw their capacity triple within days. And so they're trying to keep up with providing, you know, very basic needs such as food and clothing and shelter for our most vulnerable. And so, you know, I just encourage folks to continue and deepen your giving if you can, and, you know, really look locally. A lot of times the money that we're giving on a national level doesn't always trickle down. So
advice, Etoy, and I think give monthly and yeah, deepen that giving and continue to do that. Marcus, share some sort of final thoughts on where you think we go from here, and anything you would have liked to have said to this group that you haven't yet said.
Well, listen, I'm just so grateful for the opportunity to share in this dialogue. I mean, in terms of where we go from here, I think we have clearly indicated that we want big systemic change. And, you know, so we're, you know, this is America's Arab Spring for the world even. You know, my own sort of maybe non-obvious answer about where we go from here, which might surprise some, is I think the key to success is more women leaders. I think we need to like really harness a real strong feminist revolution that unlocks a different, I mean, it's obvious from this conversation. Yes. This is like a deeply empathetic model that, you know, as Liesel was saying, like, look, you can get your market rate returns, but you can also really deeply impact the world and the way things need to be. And
absolutely,
I'll just own it. I don't think that, you know, we're terribly good at demonstrating, you know, over the course of human history that we shouldn't have at least a co-share, if not allow women just the seat at the driver's seat, you know, and making things happen. So, you know, every conversation that I'm in now around anti-racist conversations, which are deeply important, I in my mind, I'm scratching out the word racist and I'm adding in sexist, because I think right after we get finished apologizing to Black and indigenous people, we have to really address the issues of race, of sexism in America.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Agree with that, Kathy?
Yeah, I would say that I echo what everybody says on the panel. I think what Marcus has been saying, it's really been wonderful just between yesterday and today to get to know you, Marcus, and hear some of your thoughts. Liesel, clearly you are also, you've been ahead of the curve here with a lot of what we're talking about, and you continue to do that, and I think that's fantastic. And Etoy, you know, gotten to know Etoy really well over the last few months, and you're just a shining light. You're a doer. And I think too what Marcus said about women, like, look, we work so hard to raise our children, right? From 0 to 18, we work so hard. We raise these kids. We put everything we have into giving them the opportunity to succeed. Right. And then they turn 18 and all the injustices happen, right? That's when everything changes. And so I think we have to embrace that energy and that focus and that non-acceptance of anything else but opportunity for our children, for each other, for other people, so that it's not going to happen anymore. We are saying no. now and just moving forward. And if we take that energy that we put into our children to get them to 18, we should be able to figure out where's that energy that we're not accepting anymore. And from 18 on, it's not happening either. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you, Kathy. And Liesel, just to close, before we close, any parting thoughts from you on where we go from here?
I mean, I think just, I don't know, I'm to keep listening and iterating, and that's what, I don't know, that's where I feel like this year for me has been, one big, it's been reaffirming in a terrifying way of some things that we have been focusing on, but also an opportunity, as I think Etoy said in the beginning, to actually just be quiet for a second and listen to other people and develop a deeper sense of empathy, and then sort of move swiftly but silently. That's been something I'm learning to do more.
Yes, that's good.
And I think, I mean, Liesel and Etoy and Marcus, I'm huge fans of yours. Thank you so much, and Kathy, thank you as well. It's been such an open and moving and candid and important conversation. I know that I've been educating myself over the last few weeks, and I'm grateful to have your support in that. And I think we realised that what we're talking about is the future of impact and social innovation in so many guises. So thank you so much for such a great conversation. I wish we could do more of it, and I know we will, and I know we'll continue. Most importantly, thanks to everyone that joined us today, and thank you for your great questions and engagement. We hope you enjoyed it and took something from it. Please do share any feedback with us. We'd love to hear your comments and any other topics you'd like us to cover in our next normal series. You can email us at community@worth.com. And tune in for next week, next Thursday, 11 a.m., where we're joined by Roger Dow, President and CEO of the US Travel Association, Neil Jacobs, CEO of Six Senses Hotel, Resorts and Spa, and Robert Chase, CEO of Visit Barbados, and Kathy, where we'll be discussing the future of the travel and tourism industry. You can register online at worth.com/events, and also go there for all of our events that are coming up, as well as sign up for our weekly newsletter. In the meantime, be kind, stay healthy, enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks again so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.